For most of his life, my son Daniel believed I was an ordinary retired widow living on a modest income. In a way, that was exactly what I wanted him to believe. After my husband passed away nearly 20 years ago, I faced a choice. I could allow grief and hardship to define the rest of my life, or I could build something meaningful from the pain. I chose the second path. What Daniel never knew was that the small consulting business I started from my dining room table slowly grew into something far bigger than I had ever imagined. Year after year, through persistence, long hours, and countless sacrifices, it expanded until it was generating nearly $40,000 a month. The income was more than enough to live comfortably, but I never felt the need to show it. I stayed in the same modest house where Daniel had grown up. I drove the same reliable sedan for years. My wardrobe remained simple, and I avoided expensive jewelry. To outsiders, I looked like an average woman enjoying a quiet retirement. There was a reason for that. Money has a strange way of changing people's behavior. Some become kinder when they think you are wealthy. Others become interested in what they can gain from you. Very few treat everyone with the same respect, regardless of what is in their bank account. Over the years, I had learned that appearances often reveal more about other people than they reveal about you. Daniel was a good son when he was young. He was thoughtful, respectful, and hardworking. Even during difficult times after his father's death, he did his best to help around the house. I was always proud of the man he was becoming. But as he got older and advanced in his career, I noticed small changes. They weren't dramatic at first. He began talking more often about successful people, but rarely mentioned their kindness or integrity. Instead, he admired their houses, luxury cars, expensive vacations, and impressive salaries. Whenever he described someone he respected, wealth seemed to be the first thing he noticed. I told myself it was normal. Many young professionals become fascinated by success. Yet the pattern continued. Then he met Sophia. She was intelligent, ambitious, and confident. Daniel fell in love quickly. I welcomed her warmly because I wanted my son to be happy. At first, she was polite whenever we met. She smiled, asked questions, and thanked me for dinners. Still, something felt distant. Our conversations rarely went beyond surface-level pleasantries. She never seemed interested in knowing me as a person. Instead, she often asked indirect questions about my finances, retirement plans, or property. The questions were always wrapped in friendly language, but I noticed them. After their wedding, the distance became even more noticeable. Visits grew less frequent. Phone calls became shorter. Most invitations arrived only when there was a family gathering or holiday involved. I tried not to take it personally. One Wednesday evening, as I was reading a book in my living room, my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I smiled before answering. "Hello, sweetheart." "Hi, Mom," he said cheerfully. "How are you?" We exchanged a few minutes of casual conversation before he got to the reason for his call. "Sophia's parents want to have dinner next Saturday. They said it's time for everyone to spend an evening together." "That sounds lovely," I replied. "I'd be happy to come." There was a brief pause on the line. Then Daniel cleared his throat. "Oh, and Mom, maybe wear something nice." I laughed softly. "I usually wear something nice." "No, I mean—" He hesitated. "Sophia's parents are very successful people. They appreciate certain standards." The comment wasn't intended to be cruel, but it lingered in my mind after the call ended. Certain standards. As I sat quietly in my living room, I found myself wondering what that meant. Did he think I would embarrass him? Did Sophia's parents already have assumptions about me? The more I thought about it, the more curious I became. I had heard countless stories about Sophia's family. They owned multiple properties, traveled frequently, and enjoyed an affluent lifestyle. According to Daniel, they were highly respected in their social circles. But there was one thing I didn't know. How did they treat people they believed had very little? That question stayed with me for the rest of the week. By Friday evening, I had made a decision. I would attend the dinner exactly as they expected. No expensive accessories, no hints about my business, no signs of financial success whatsoever. I would simply be myself, a quiet widow in simple clothes. If they judged me by appearances, I would see it clearly. If they treated me with kindness regardless of what they assumed about my finances, I would gladly admit my concerns were unfounded. Either way, I would learn something important. As Saturday approached, I felt a strange mixture of curiosity and unease. I had no idea that one dinner would reveal far more than I expected, not only about Sophia's family, but also about my own son. Saturday evening arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and carefully adjusted the old beige cardigan I had owned for years. It wasn't worn out, but it certainly wasn't fashionable. I chose a simple blouse, comfortable shoes, and carried an inexpensive handbag that I normally used for grocery shopping. For a moment, I looked at my reflection and smiled. Nothing about me suggested financial success. I looked exactly like what most people would assume, a retired widow living a quiet, modest life. That was the point. I drove my aging sedan across town and eventually arrived in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city. Large homes lined the streets, each one more impressive than the last. Perfectly trimmed lawns stretched toward elegant entrances illuminated by decorative lighting. When I pulled into the driveway of Sophia's parents' house, I immediately noticed several luxury vehicles parked outside. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my car and walked toward the front door. A few seconds after ringing the bell, the door opened. Sophia's mother, Victoria, stood before me wearing an elegant dress and expensive jewelry. Her smile appeared instantly, but something changed the moment her eyes traveled over my outfit. The smile didn't disappear completely. It simply weakened. "Oh," she said, "you made it." "Thank you for inviting me," I replied warmly. "Of course, please come in." As I entered the house, I couldn't help noticing the lavish decorations. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Expensive artwork covered the walls. Every detail seemed carefully selected to communicate wealth and status. Victoria led me toward the living room where everyone else was gathered. Daniel stood and hugged me. "Hi, Mom." His greeting was affectionate, but I noticed his eyes briefly scanning my clothes. Sophia greeted me politely, before returning her attention to the conversation she had been having with her father. Sophia's father, Richard, shook my hand. "It's nice to finally have everyone together," he said. The words sounded friendly enough, yet his attention drifted away almost immediately. Within minutes, the conversation turned toward business investments, property acquisitions, and financial opportunities. Richard spoke confidently about market trends and recent purchases. Victoria enthusiastically described luxury vacations and exclusive social events. Whenever someone mentioned a successful executive or entrepreneur, admiration filled the room. I listened quietly while sipping water. Several times I attempted to contribute to the discussion. Each time I was interrupted before finishing my thought. At first I assumed it was accidental. Then it kept happening. When Daniel mentioned a community project I had helped organize, Richard quickly redirected the discussion back to real estate investments. When I commented on the importance of mentoring young professionals, Victoria nodded briefly before changing the subject to private clubs and memberships. The message became increasingly clear. My opinions held little value in their eyes. Dinner was eventually served in a magnificent dining room with a table large enough to seat 12 people. The meal itself was impressive. Every detail had been carefully arranged. Unfortunately, the conversation only became more uncomfortable. Sophia frequently praised her parents' accomplishments. "My father built everything through hard work," she said proudly. Richard smiled. "It takes ambition to succeed." Victoria nodded in agreement. "Many people settle for average lives because they lack vision." Her eyes briefly met mine before shifting away. I pretended not to notice. As the evening continued, Subtle comments became more direct. Richard spoke about people who never achieved financial independence. Victoria criticized individuals who relied on pensions or retirement savings. Neither mentioned me by name, but the implication was impossible to miss. Then Sophia looked directly at me. "So, what do you do these days?" The question itself seemed harmless, yet something in her tone made the entire table quiet. I set down my fork and smiled. "I stay busy. I enjoy helping people, volunteering when I can, and advising others occasionally." Sophia tilted her head. "Advising?" "A little consulting here and there." Richard chuckled softly. "Consulting can mean almost anything these days." A few people laughed. I remained calm. "It keeps me occupied." Victoria smiled politely. "Well, not everyone feels the need to pursue major ambitions at this stage of life." Again, light laughter followed. The words weren't openly insulting, but they carried enough condescension to sting. What hurt most wasn't their behavior, it was Daniel's reaction. He didn't challenge them, he didn't defend me. Instead, he smiled awkwardly and laughed along with everyone else. Perhaps he wanted to avoid conflict. Perhaps he wanted approval from his in-laws. Whatever the reason, the result felt the same. For the first time, I saw genuine embarrassment in my son's eyes whenever the conversation drifted toward me. That realization hurt far more than any comment made by Sophia's parents. As dessert was served, I stopped trying to contribute. Instead, I observed. I watched how they treated people they considered important. I watched how they spoke about those they considered unsuccessful. Most importantly, I watched my son adapt himself to fit into their world. By the end of the evening, I had learned something valuable. Their respect wasn't freely given. It was earned through status, wealth, and influence. Without those things, a person became nearly invisible. As I drove home later that night, the disappointment settled heavily in my heart. I wasn't angry. I was saddened. Because the dinner had revealed more than the character of Sophia's parents. It had revealed how much my son had changed, and deep down, I knew this story was far from over. The week following the dinner was unusually quiet. Daniel didn't call, and I didn't reach out either. It wasn't out of anger. I simply needed time to process everything I had witnessed that evening. The memory that stayed with me wasn't Richard's dismissive comments or Victoria's carefully disguised insults. It wasn't even Sophia's cold attitude. It was Daniel's silence. Again and again, I replayed those moments in my mind. Every time someone made a remark that belittled me, he had an opportunity to speak up. He could have changed the subject. He could have offered a kind word. He could have reminded everyone that respect should never depend on a person's income. Instead, he chose comfort over courage. That realization hurt more than I wanted to admit. Still, life continued. My consulting business remained as busy as ever. Although most people thought I was retired, I spent several hours each week advising companies and nonprofit organizations. I enjoyed the work because it allowed me to help businesses grow while creating opportunities for employees and communities. One Monday morning, I attended a strategy meeting for a large corporation that I had advised for years. As executives discussed upcoming projects, one name immediately caught my attention. Richard. The company was reviewing proposals from several firms competing for a major consulting and development contract. Richard's company happened to be one of the finalists. I sat quietly while listening to the discussion. No one in the room knew about my connection to him through Daniel's marriage. Likewise, Richard had absolutely no idea that I was one of the senior advisors helping evaluate the proposals. The coincidence surprised me. Out of hundreds of businesses in the region, his had landed directly in front of me. For a moment, I wondered whether fate had a sense of humor. Over the next several weeks, I reviewed documents, attended meetings, and observed presentations from all the competing firms. The experience taught me something interesting. Richard was talented. His company produced good results. However, I also noticed a pattern. He often exaggerated accomplishments. He took credit for work performed by entire teams. He focused heavily on image and presentation while overlooking important details involving employee development and customer relationships. More than once, I heard him speak differently to people depending on their position. When addressing executives, he was charming and attentive. When speaking to assistants, support staff, or junior employees, his enthusiasm noticeably faded. The contrast reminded me of the dinner. People were valuable when they could offer something. Otherwise, they were largely ignored. Meanwhile, my relationship with Daniel continued drifting in the wrong direction. Our conversations became less frequent. When we did speak, they felt rushed. One afternoon, I called simply to ask how he was doing. He answered, but something felt distracted in his voice. After a few minutes, he mentioned an upcoming networking event. "Sophia and I have been meeting a lot of important people lately," he said. I smiled sadly. That's nice. The connections could really help my career. I wished him success, but after ending the call, I sat quietly for a long time. Years earlier, Daniel would have talked about meaningful projects, friendships, or goals that excited him. Now most conversations seemed centered around influence, opportunities, and status. I couldn't help wondering when that shift had happened. One evening, as I reviewed my calendar, I noticed an upcoming charity gala organized by one of the companies I advised. The annual event raised money for educational programs and community scholarships. Business leaders, investors, executives, and local organizations would all be attending. As one of the primary sponsors, I had been invited to speak during the event. That was when an idea began forming in my mind. Not a plan for revenge, not a scheme to embarrass anyone. Something far simpler. An opportunity for truth. I contacted the event coordinator and confirmed several additional invitations. A few days later, Daniel called. "Mom, thanks for sending those gala tickets." "Are you coming?" I asked. "Absolutely. Sophia's parents are excited too. Apparently, some very influential people will be there." I smiled quietly. "I hope everyone enjoys the evening." After hanging up, I looked out my window and watched the sunset. For the first time since the dinner, I felt a sense of peace. The upcoming event would place everyone in the same room. There would be no disguises, no assumptions, no opportunities to judge someone based solely on an old cardigan or a modest car. Most importantly, I wouldn't need to expose anyone's behavior. The truth would reveal itself naturally. If Daniel had forgotten the values I spent years teaching him, perhaps seeing reality with his own eyes would help him remember. As the gala approached, I found myself thinking less about disappointment and more about hope. People make mistakes. People lose their way. What matters is whether they recognize it before it's too late. Soon, Daniel would discover a side of my life he had never known existed. And when that moment arrived, the lesson wouldn't be about money. It would be about character, because wealth can impress strangers for a few moments. Character is what earns respect long after the money is gone. The gala was only days away, and although nobody realized it yet, that evening would change every relationship in our family. The night of the charity gala arrived with an air of excitement that could be felt the moment guests stepped into the grand ballroom. Elegant tables filled the room, soft music played in the background, and conversations flowed between business leaders, community organizers, and local philanthropists. I arrived early, as I usually did. Over the years, I had learned that events like these were never really about appearances. They were about relationships, opportunities, and finding ways to help others. The scholarships funded by this gala had changed countless young lives, and that mattered far more to me than any recognition. From across the room, I noticed Daniel, Sophia, Richard, and Victoria entering together. They looked confident and excited. Richard immediately began greeting people he recognized. Victoria admired the decorations while Sophia looked around, clearly impressed by the scale of the event. Daniel's eyes wandered through the crowd as if searching for important contacts. None of them had seen me yet. I was speaking with several board members near the stage when the event coordinator approached and handed me a microphone schedule. The program would begin in a few minutes. Guests gradually took their seats. At one point, Daniel finally noticed me standing near the front of the room. He looked surprised but smiled politely and waved. I waved back. From his expression, it was obvious he assumed I had simply arrived early or perhaps volunteered to help organize the event. A few minutes later, the lights dimmed. The host stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone. After introducing the evening's purpose, he began thanking various sponsors, community partners, and donors whose contributions had made the scholarship program possible. Then something happened. The host spoke my name. At first, Daniel looked confused. Sophia turned toward the stage. Richard frowned slightly. The host continued. He spoke about my consulting firm, the educational initiatives we had funded, and the years of work dedicated to supporting students from low-income families. The confusion on their faces quickly transformed into disbelief. I stood and walked toward the stage. The room applauded warmly. As I stepped into the spotlight, I could clearly see their table. Victoria's mouth had fallen open. Sophia stared at me without blinking. Richard looked as though he was trying to understand whether he had heard correctly. Daniel simply sat frozen. The host continued listing accomplishments I had never discussed with my family. He mentioned business awards, community projects, scholarship programs, partnerships with major organizations. Most importantly, he explained that our company had been one of the event's largest sponsors for several years. When he finally handed me the microphone, the ballroom grew quiet. I could have used that moment to embarrass them. I could have mentioned the dinner. I could have repeated every dismissive comment and every insult hidden behind polite smiles. Instead, I chose a different path. I thanked the audience for supporting the scholarship program and spoke about the importance of creating opportunities for others. Then I shared a lesson life had taught me many years earlier. Success can be measured in many ways, I said. Some people measure it through money. Others measure it through titles or possessions. But I believe the true measure of success is how we treat people when we have nothing to gain from them. The room became completely silent. I continued. Every person deserves respect, not because of their income, their career, or their social status. They deserve respect because they are human beings. My eyes briefly settled on Daniel's table. No names were mentioned. No accusations were made. Yet the message reached exactly where it needed to go. The true measure of character, I said softly, is how you treat people who can do nothing for you. The applause that followed lasted several seconds. When I returned to my seat, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because anyone had been exposed, not because I had proven a point, but because I had spoken the truth. The remainder of the evening passed quickly. Eventually, guests began leaving. As people gathered near the exits, Daniel approached me alone. His eyes were red. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he wrapped his arms around me. "I'm sorry, Mom." The words came out quietly. I didn't answer immediately. He stepped back and looked at me. "I thought about that dinner every day," he admitted. "I knew something was wrong, but I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal. Tonight, I realized how badly I failed you." His voice cracked. "I wasn't ashamed of you because of money. I was ashamed because I cared too much about what other people thought." That honesty meant more than any apology. I squeezed his hand. "What matters is what you do now." He nodded. Behind him, Sophia approached slowly. She apologized as well. Her words seemed sincere. Even Richard and Victoria eventually joined us. For the first time, there was no arrogance in their voices, no superiority, no carefully disguised judgment, only discomfort and regret. Whether their change was permanent, I couldn't know, but I appreciated the effort. Over the following months, something remarkable happened. Daniel began visiting regularly again. Our conversations became longer. He asked about my experiences, my work, and the lessons I had learned throughout life. More importantly, he listened. One afternoon, I overheard him teaching his young nephew something that made me smile. "Never judge someone by what they own," he said. "You never know their story." In that moment, I realized the lesson had finally taken root. I still lived in the same modest house. I still drove the same old sedan. Most people who met me would never guess my income, and that was perfectly fine with me, because money had never been the most valuable thing I possessed. Respect was, character was, kindness was. Those things couldn't be bought, inherited, or displayed in a bank account. And in the end, the sweetest revenge wasn't proving that I was wealthy. It was watching the people who had underestimated me learn that every person deserves dignity, whether they have $40 or $40,000 a month.